Good evening. This is Mariana Mitchell, and I'm here to share with you the chapter that I picked from the Difficult Conversations text, which was chapter 2, titled Stop Arguing About Who's Right. And essentially, this is the chapter that spoke the most to me just because in my career of conflict mediation and working in various situations, it kind of seems that a lot of resolutions are stuck because the people who are involved in conflict are often stuck upon who's right and who's wrong, when the reality assigning blame isn't going to what's going to get us to a relevant solution. So again, concentrating on this chapter kind of spoke to me based on my personal experiences. So first off, we go into why we argue and why it doesn't help. So ultimately, when it comes to arguing or conflict, we often think that the other person involved in the conflict, they are the problem. So either someone else is selfish, they don't understand the full situation, they don't see what we see. We try and make sense of what's occurring, and in the text, they call it our story. We make sense of it out of what's happened based on our perceptions, and we create our story. And ultimately, arguing with one another blocks us from exploring each other's stories. So, because we're so stuck on the situation that we're involved in, we don't take a moment to take a look and see the view from the other side. And then ultimately, arguing without understanding leads to unresponsiveness. So, basically, just kind of going forward and being stuck on who's right and who's wrong ultimately doesn't lead to any type of solution for either of the people who are involved in conflict. So moving on, it's clear that as individuals, we have different sources of information. We notice different things based on our own personal experiences. We interpret things differently, which and change. We come up with different conclusions, and ultimately, a lot of conflict management comes from, or your ability to manage conflict better comes from the fact that we have to get to know ourselves better because no one can know us better than we do. We know how we interpret things. We know our past experiences, and so we know how we may react to certain things, our hot buttons, so things of that nature. So again, that's important to understand when you're managing conflict. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we all have different interpretations. So, a lot of our interpretations about things that happen to us in either the workplace and our personal lives are all influenced by situations we've experienced in the past. And then also, it's important to note that we apply different rules. We apply different implicit rules to different people. So, depending on the situation, depending on who's involved in it, I'll interact with my husband differently than I'll interact with my coworkers at work or even my mom. So again, rules change depending on who I'm working with, and then in turn, those have different interpretations to the type of conflict or the stories that are being told or that I'm understanding through the course of the conflict. So again, it's important to understand that our conclusions often reflect our self-interest because we're interested in our side of the story, and it's natural or it's nature for us to want to be right. So, what the text suggests is moving from certainty to curiosity, because oftentimes in conflict, when we are playing the stories in our mind, we often assert certain attributes. We, feel that somebody's not understanding or they're being selfish, and instead of asserting that onto that individual, the book suggests that it's better for us to be curious into why they believe they are right or why they acted the way they did, or asking questions as a means to better understanding the situation, and then of course better understanding your story. Why did I react the way that I did? Why is this so important to me to be right? So asking those deeper questions and fielding the situation for additional information is really important to coming to a consensus, and then ultimately getting to a point to where you feel comfortable to embrace both stories, meaning that there's no just one right answer. Both stories could be right in their own sense depending upon how you look at it. So again, what the book also suggests is when you embrace both stories, you can adopt the and stance. Because although I feel that I'm correct in my assertion that this should be the one right way, based on my experiences, having the understanding that another individual sees things differently will help us come to a better conclusion and then ultimately reach a consensus as opposed to just arguing things out. The book also details a couple exceptions that aren't really exceptions, one of them being that what if I really am right, or if I have to give somebody bad news? Again, in the world of conflict resolution and conflict management, when you're having difficult conversations, although, in if there's a clear right and wrong answer, if you feel you're in the right, doesn't necessarily mean that's what's best for handling the situation, or that's what's best for managing the relationship and ultimately managing the conflict to come to a resolution. And then also, it's extremely important that when moving forward, the more that you understand yourself, the more that you know about yourself, especially when it pertains to conflict or how you manage to handle conflict or how you perceive certain situations, the more equipped you are at dealing with difficult conversations that will ultimately result in conflict. So, this is my brief synopsis on Chapter 2 for the book Difficult Conversations. I hope you found it insightful, and I truly enjoyed the book. It's a great, easy read, and I wish you all the best in the coming holidays, and thank you so much.